One tonight. So remember where we're at, and David has made preparations. It's nearing the end of David's reign, nearing the end of his time as king. He's getting fairly aged and kind of worn out, you might say. He's had a busy, tough life in a lot of ways. He's organized the Levites. Remember, as the worship shifts from a tabernacle that's movable to the temple that's a structure, some things change. He organizes that, sets up their jobs, and gets that ready to go. Remember, he's not going to build the temple. He's just making the preparations for it, gathering, collecting supplies, money, resources. And remember, look in 1 Chronicles chapter 28. We want to make sure that we understand this point as we start tonight's lesson. In chapter 28, now this is David, and it's in chapter 28, the first 10 or 12 verses or so. David's he's assembled at Jerusalem all the officials, the princes of the tribes, the leaders, the commanders, all of these he's gathered together. And he talks to them, and he tells them essentially what he's doing. And he talks about what God has told him, that he's not going to build it, but he's going to gather the preparations for it. He had intended to do that. He wanted to do that, but God instructs him otherwise. And the main thing we want to know for tonight's study is verse 5. He says, "Of all my sons, for God has given me many sons, he has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. And he said to me, your son Solomon is the one who shall build my house and my courts. For I've chosen him to be a son to me, and I will be a father to him. I will establish his kingdom forever." So David makes it very plain to all the ones there. It's not a secret. It's not quiet. It's not something that's been hidden. But everyone knows that Solomon's God's chosen to be the next king. All right, and before we get started on everything, we need to just remember how much there's not a lot of time left or there's not a lot of material, honestly, about Solomon himself. All right, so let's look at that real quickly. 1 Kings chapter 1, and if you just look through there, you'll notice that the first 11 chapters are concerning Solomon. All right, so 1 Kings chapter 1 through 11. What happens in chapter 12? We've got the division. That's exactly right. So the kingdom divides. So from, we're just finishing David. He's still alive, but Solomon's going to be crowned king, anointed king here in chapter 1. But his lifespan is only these 11 chapters. All right. You look over to 1st or 2nd Chronicles, and we notice. You remember when Bob teaches in his book the A and the B narrative? We've got that going on still, and we've got the same material recorded for us in two different places. So in 2nd Chronicles, chapters 1 through 9, we have the same thing. And what happens in chapter 10? The kingdom divides. In fact, I've got it written in both places and pretty big. Divided kingdom begins right here. All right. Now, one other thing to notice is how much, that's all we have about the history kind of a song. Now there's other things, of course, in Ecclesiastes and Songs of Solomon, But as far as the story and what we have, this is it. And also notice, back to 1 Kings, if you look to chapters 4 or chapters 5 through 7, that's talking specifically about the temple and Solomon building it, consecrating it, dedicating it, God filling it, coming to the temple, and all things about the temple. So that even reduces further the amount of stories and history we have about Solomon. In 2 Chronicles, of only 9 chapters, 6 of them are dedicated to the temple. So there's not a lot about Solomon. But just know that we're that close to finishing the quarter and we'll be done. We've got 2 more months. What we're going to do after this is we're going to go over some of the other books in the Old Testament. We'll go through some of the literature, the poetry. We'll go through Psalms and Proverbs. Job, we'll do Job first, Psalms and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Songs of Solomon. So we've got all of that to cover in these remaining 2 months as well. So that's actually a lot of material. So it's not a deep dive by any means, but as we go through it in this 3-year cycle period, this is the amount of time we have to do that. So back to 1 Kings chapter 1 and the lesson. So David is he's frail. He's near the end of his life. I think I don't remember if it said it that he was 70 years old or if that was elsewhere. Maybe in there. But even as being 70 years old, we don't think about that being too old. But think about David's life. It's pretty rough. He's taking a beating, literally sometimes. He's had a tough life. So he's pretty frail and even, kind of bedridden to a point, as we'll see. So that's the situation. He is still king. But remember, how many sons does David have? It's not a number that I would have remembered without looking at it and thinking back. All right, very good. 17 sons. And you go back to 2 Samuel chapter 2 and chapter 5, or chapter 3 and chapter 5, to see that. And there's listed names of his different wives and the sons. Well, all right, who have we seen? We've seen Absalom. Absalom was the eldest, so he was going to take over, right? But he was killed. Amnon was the oldest. There was a couple of who were older, 2 or 3 who were older, and then Adonijah. That's right. Thank you. And then Absalom would have been next. He was killed. Well, Adonijah is actually the next oldest in line, who would typically, in most, reckonings, would be the next one to be king. Well, he thinks he wants to be king. He wants that. Well, what has David said? Solomon's going to be king. Now, what is really important about David saying that Solomon is going to be the next king? Who has selected Solomon to be the king? God has. That was God's word, and David made that clear in chapter 28 of 1 Chronicles. So as we look at this, and we have really another rebellion, this one doesn't get nearly as messy at all as the previous rebellions that we've seen of those who wanted the throne. With Adonijah's, it really didn't get off the ground very much. Okay, so Adonijah, the oldest son, he says, "I will be king." He wants to be king. Now, if you want to be king, what do you need to do? You've got to get some pretty hefty followers with you, and Joab takes a side with Adonijah. So, and another one was Abiathar. And there was others, brothers and other leaders, who sided with Adonijah in this. And what Adonijah did was he invited, he made a feast just outside in En-Rogel, just outside of Jerusalem. He invites all of them, all of these different ones, some leaders, his brothers, Joab, Abiathar. They go out there to this outside of Jerusalem, outside the walls, and he worships, he sacrifices, and he has this feast for everyone. And essentially, he's going to proclaim himself to be the king in this event. So, in addition to that, remember what Absalom did when he wanted to be king? What was one of the first things we read about him that kind of apparently displayed his importance anyway? That's right. That's mentioned in the exact same context. He would stand at the gate and he would talk to people as they came in and sort of turn the hearts of the people, you know, right there. One of the other things he did in that same instance, it's recorded, is he had a chariot with 50 men who would run in front of him, right? So this big thing that would go in front of him. Well, Adonijah does this same thing. So he's done that. He's got some followers with him. He's gotten Joab, Joab's pretty a worthy person to have on your side. Joab does what needs to be done, or at least in his estimation of what needs to be done, not necessarily what David wanted to be done, or even God. But so he's got all these ready, and he's having this feast. Well, Nathan the prophet comes back to us on the scene, and Nathan learns about this event and Adonijah's plans and this rebellion. And Nathan devises a plan, and he talks to Bathsheba, and he tells her that she needs to go in to David, and here's the conversation that you need to have. And Nathan kind of lays it out of what Bathsheba needs to say. And she agrees. She's in favor of it. And so they do this. So let's go in and start with verse 15 we'll pick up. So this is what they've decided to do. And at some point they had agreed that Nathan would come in and confirm what Bathsheba is saying to David in this conversation. So Nathan will come in here in just a little bit. But first, in verse 15, Bathsheba, she goes into the king. He's very old. He's being ministered to. Bathsheba bows before the king, and he says, "What do you wish?" She says, "My lord," verse 17, "you swore to your maidservant by the Lord your God, saying, 'Surely your son Solomon shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne.'" And she says, "Now behold, Adonijah is king, and now, my lord the king, you do not know it." So she's informing him of what Adonijah is doing. Verse 19, she keeps going. "He has sacrificed oxen and fatlings and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king, and Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army, but he has not invited Solomon, your servant. As for you now, my lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you to tell them who shall sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise it will come about, as soon as my lord the king sleeps with his fathers, that I and my son Solomon will be considered offenders or criminals." All right? So she tells him, she asks him, why is Adonijah the king, in this? She tells David what Adonijah is doing, that all of Israel is watching you to see what you do in this matter. Adonijah's out here outside the walls proclaiming himself king, and Solomon inside the walls, he's supposed to be the king, but what has David not done yet? Well, he actually in chapter 28, he did tell them that who is going to be, but he hasn't done the deed and made that happen and made the transition and said, make the anointing, the crown, and sit him on the throne, and here he is. David still has the throne at this point, but David's not ruling really. I mean, he's pretty much, lay down and not active any longer. So with this, she tells him all this and lays it out, what's happening. And Nathan comes in and he says, the Lord, the king, have you said that Adonijah shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he is gone today, and he essentially tells him the same thing. He's gone to sacrifice oxen and fattenings and sheep in abundance with the commander Joab and Abiathar, and they're eating and drinking before them, and they're saying, long live King Adonijah. So he relays exactly what's going on as well. He says, but me, even me your servant, and Zadok the priest, and Benaiah, and your servant Solomon, he is not invited. All right, so who is Zadok? All these names, there's a lot of them. All right, he's a high priest. Who else is high priest? We've actually got two kind of going here. Abiathar was the high priest when Saul was reigning, right? And so for a time period here, Abiathar was so loyal to David that he makes him high priest. So there's actually sort of two, and we don't know exactly how that worked or anything about that, but they're both referred to in that way. Well, both of them are here, Zadok and Abiathar. So he says that Zadok, along with Nathan the prophet and Benaiah. Who is Benaiah? He was one of the commanders. He was one of the mighty men, right? So he was one of David's closest, along with Joab. But the ones that are here, Zadok, Benaiah, Solomon, and Nathan the prophet, they're not invited. And they wouldn't have gone from what we're reading. So he continues on. He says, has this thing been done by my lord the king, and you have not shown to your servants who should sit on the throne? So in other words, David, was this your plan for this actually to happen in some way? Really just prodding David to make a decision and do something. And David said, call Bathsheba. So she comes back. And the king vowed and said, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress, surely as I vowed to you, your son Solomon shall be king after me, and he shall sit on the throne in my place. I will indeed do so this day. And so he's going to make this happen. So King David says, call Zadok, Nathan, Benaiah, and so they all come in, and he says, take with you Solomon, put him on my mule. All right, so that's a signature event of being on the king's ride. And you three take Solomon, and you're going to go to Gihon, and there Zadok the priest and Nathan a prophet, you're going to anoint Solomon there, and you're going to blow the trumpets, and you're going, and the people and all of you are going to yell out, "Long live King Solomon!" And you'll come up after him, and you'll bring him back, and he's going to sit on my throne, for I've appointed him to be ruler over Israel and Judah. So they do that, and David makes Solomon the king of Israel. They go, Benaiah, Nathan, they go and anoint him. Benaiah is with them. Nathan and Zadok anoint him. And they come back and put him on the throne. So, let's see, let's catch up here. All right. So the people see this and gather, and they are overcome, and they celebrate with them, and they're making a lot of noise in the celebration. And it turns out that Adonijah, Joab, Abiathar, all those who are close but outside of Jerusalem, they hear this. And so he questions, Joab, I think, questions, you know, what's the noise that we hear? And about that time, somebody comes running. Jonathan comes running to them. Now, who is Jonathan? Son of Abiathar. That's right. You remember what David had set up, Abiathar and Jonathan, his son? You remember that little spy system that they had during the last rebellion? Jonathan was one of the runners who was going to be getting information back and forth from Saul inside Saul's camp to David. So Jonathan comes running. Adonijah sees him, knows him, appreciates him. He's a worthy man, and he thinks he's got good news. But Jonathan delivers the message: David has put Solomon on the throne. So, Adonijah, then what does he do? What does everybody do, really, who are outside the walls of Jerusalem? They take off running. So they scatter. Adonijah himself runs to the temple, or to the tabernacle, and he puts himself, and it was somewhat, it was not uncommon to do this. He goes to the altar. Now, what's the altar look like? You remember the altar, burnt offerings that's out there in front? Big old thing. They sacrifice lots of stuff on it, right? And there's horns on this thing that come up off of the four corners, right? So he goes and he puts his hand on those, and he stays there, and he doesn't move. And it's a sign of pleading of mercy, all right? And that's what he's doing, trying to save his own life. And so he's there, he stays there. Word gets back to Solomon, he's on the throne now, that Adonijah is there at the tabernacle doing this. And so Solomon sends word to him. Let's see where that's at. Ran away. Verse 51. Adonijah's afraid. The word comes to Solomon that Adonijah has done this, taken hold of the horns of the altar, and he's wanting Solomon, the king, to swear that he will not put him to death. So Solomon replies, he will not harm one of the hairs on his head, but if wickedness is found in him, he will die. So in other words, Solomon is going to grant mercy, let him live with, a condition that Adonijah lives right, that he does not cause any problems, further problems, with this. So Solomon sent, and they brought him down from the altar, Adonijah that is. Adonijah came, bowed before the king, and Solomon said, "Go to your house, go in peace." So Adonijah has his head, and Solomon is on the throne. Everyone else has gone, has fled from this, and ran back, gone on back to their homes or wherever. But who's been the rebellious ones? Joab, one of the main players. Adonijah, Joab, Abiathar, right? So we're going to see what happens. We'll do that Sunday. We're not going to cover that this time, but we got to keep that in mind as we go until we get back to Sunday. That these people are still in play, because what really is going to happen is some things are going to take place, and he's going to, in a way, concrete his position as king, right? And all of these who have betrayed him and David and disobeyed God, we're going to talk about that here in just a second, he's going to deal with them. All right, but we're not going to get into that part tonight. All right. Okay. Well, we're going to finish early. Okay. Sure. Okay. Go ahead. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Very good points and good observations. And I'm not going to try to repeat all that. I'd mess it up. Um, yeah, with David, and it's with his sons, he just doesn't make good decisions. It was just a blind spot of, I think you used the term maybe soft spot, and let's think about that. When we're raising our kids, is that something that we can learn a lesson from this? If we have such a soft spot, and I mean, just naturally, our children, our babies, that they just fill us with so much love, and we care so much about them. If that was what was in David's, if he was in that same spot, even as they grew up, the decisions, the discipline or handling them, he just didn't. He didn't make good decisions regarding them. He didn't, obviously as they got older, their attitudes and their characteristics, it's not the things that we want of our children, right? That he would want of his children. So, yeah, something to think about. Good comment. Something else along with the thoughts and the lessons of it, and it goes back to the fact that David, and it goes back to leadership. He has said who's going to be the king. This is what David laid that down. Although the ceremony and actually putting him on the throne had not taken place, David had said that he was going to be king. What should all the citizens of the kingdom say, or how should they all the David's, subordinates and everyone under him, what should be their attitude? Solomon's going to be king. But David had been soft in those areas regarding his leadership and making wise decisions regarding his kids, especially. You can expect some pandemonium, some things going on when there's not good leadership. So he has said who's going, and why, but he pointed out in chapter 28, remember, whose decision was this? It really wasn't David's. David did not choose this the way we read 1 Chronicles chapter 28. God chose Solomon to be the king. Okay? So that's pretty huge when we start thinking about Adonijah and what his attitude is toward this. Adonijah wanted what? He wanted to be king. He wanted the throne. He wanted the prestige. He wanted everything that comes along with it, the power, the wealth, or whatever. He wanted that more than he wanted what? To respect God's authority, right? Now, it's one of those things where we can ask ourselves a question: what am I willing to sell my soul for? Adonijah, his was the throne. That was a pretty big thing. All of us have to decide, what is it we're going to sell our soul for? I'm afraid we choose, you can say that's a big, lofty thing to exchange our salvation for, or soul for. I think, sometimes as I look around, we exchange it for a whole lot less than what Adonijah was going for, don't we? We'll do it for, what do people do it for? Relationships. That's huge, isn't it? Man, it can get very rough when it comes to choosing what is spiritually what I want to do, what I need to do when it comes to relationships. Ambitions, spending, choosing what things I want to do and going forth. Go ahead. Yes, absolutely. He's saying that we need to remember that the elders are ordained, are the ones that God has put, those that has set up that structure for us, and they're the ones who we respect. So Adonijah here, he wants to do his own thing. He does not respect God's authority. What about Joab and Abiathar? Who was Abiathar again? He was the high priest. He was serving as one of the highest spiritual leaders, that God had set up for this in this time, in this era. And here he was. Is anyone infallible? David made mistakes. Abiathar, he made his choice here in not respecting God's authority. Solomon was to be the king. Abiathar thought that was a bad idea for Solomon to be the king. So he was willing and was supporting Adonijah to be the king. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So very good points and thoughts. And so take and from what you're saying, go ahead and what if we don't know? What if Adonijah, he looked the part, he was handsome, and it shows that he was, he could fit the part. uh, what if he, from all human reasoning, he was the one who could lead this people, and Solomon didn't act like that yet, didn't look like a leader yet. From all human reasoning, we could justify, maybe they could justify, maybe Joab and Abiathar saw this and said, we cannot let Solomon lead this. He cannot do this. Adonijah is the one who can do this and lead us and use human, I don't know, but just for the point of the lesson, that if we use our reasoning and it goes against what God has said and set forth and laid down, what do we need to do with our human reasoning? Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Adonijah was definitely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You got to wonder. You got to wonder if what if David still had his health at this point? This could have played out exactly like had already happened. And what do you think David would have done with that based on previous decisions that he's made? It would not have gone well, probably. You know. So, yeah, all these y'all had good thoughts. So, God has the right to choose. We're talking about the authority of God. When God lays it down, He has that right to make the decisions to choose. Did He have the right to choose Solomon over Adonijah? Of course He did. If we believe that God has the right to choose and to make the laws, then what does that mean for us? It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter if I think, I think I would have done that differently. I think I would have this law, or I would do it this way. It doesn't matter what I think. God has the right to choose. Doesn't matter what I like, think, don't like, about any of the things that God has set forth. That's where, when you look at different denominations and churches and things today, that is just so something that is so missing. Is what does God want? How has God laid this out for us? That seems to be skipped, and committees are formed, and they get together and we think, all right, well, this is what we need to do. We need to get more people in, so let's have this and do this and draw in a crowd, and we just forget or leave God and what his decision and his right to choose and lay this out. We leave that behind, just like these folks did. All right, thank you for your attention, and we'll quit right there.